Marie shifted in her seat, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel as the last glimmers of sunlight bathed the stone streets of Quebec in an amber glow. The day was giving itself over to twilight, and the city was transforming with it. The cobblestones, which had felt warm and solid underfoot just an hour ago, now held the chill of approaching night, and the shadows in the narrow alleyways stretched longer with each passing moment. She sighed and leaned back against the headrest, her gaze trailing upward to the towers of the Chateau Frontenac. The majestic hotel dominated the skyline, its steep copper roof catching the last orange hues of the sunset. Below it, the streets were slowly emptying, the day's tourists retreating into cafes, while locals sought out familiar tables in cozy restaurants. It was Friday, the start of another weekend, and yet Marie felt no different. The ritual of her evening drive, one she had repeated countless times, felt like both a comfort and a burden tonight. It had been a year since these drives had begun. At first, they were an escape, a way to fill the gaping silence in her life after Gabriel left. She would drive aimlessly, her only companions the sound of her tires on the old streets and the soft hum of the engine. But slowly, as the months passed, the drive from Quebec City to Lévis became less about running away and more about seeking something. It had taken her a long time to realize that what she was searching for was not a destination, but a moment in time. One she had lost, perhaps forever. The night Gabriel had left for the West Coast played over and over in her mind like a film reel stuck on repeat. He had looked at her with eyes that begged for understanding, but all she had given him was silence. The words she should have said, "Stay, we can figure this out together," never came. Instead, she watched him drive away, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. To stay in Quebec, to stay in her world, where everything felt safe and familiar. But now, as she started the car and merged onto Boulevard Champlain, heading toward the Pont de Québec, she felt that old world shrinking around her. The road ahead was open, but something in her chest was closing off, tightening. There was a growing sense that she had missed something crucial. Something that could never be recovered. The bridge loomed before her now, its steel arches dark against the deepening sky. As she ascended, the city of Quebec stretched out behind her, its skyline glowing faintly in the twilight. The water of the St. Lawrence River below was still and dark, reflecting the last remnants of daylight in scattered shards of light. She could see Lévis in the distance, the small town on the other side of the river, quiet and waiting, like it always did. Marie had always chosen the bridge. It was predictable, solid, grounded. Gabriel had preferred the ferry. He loved the feel of the wind whipping through his hair as they crossed the river together, standing on the deck and watching the world pass by on the water. He had seen something in the uncertainty of the river's current, in the way it was constantly shifting and changing. He had seen possibility, adventure. She had seen risk. "Why do you always choose the bridge, Marie?" he had asked her once, his tone teasing, but curious. She had laughed it off. "I like knowing where I'm going. Besides, the ferry is too slow, too unpredictable. That's what I love about it," he had replied, his eyes sparkling with a challenge. "You never know what might happen. The river's alive. It's always moving." She had dismissed his words at the time, chalking it up to his restless nature. Gabriel was always searching for the next big thing, the next adventure, while Marie craved stability, the comfort of the known. But now, as she crossed the bridge once more, she wondered if perhaps she had been wrong. If maybe life was less about knowing where you were going and more about embracing the unpredictability of the journey. The road on the Lévis side was quieter. The houses spread out more sparsely, their windows glowing softly with the light of evening meals and family gatherings. She turned off the main road and headed toward the Promenade Samuel de Champlain, a place where she often stopped to watch the river. It had become part of her ritual, a way to pause and reflect before heading back home. But tonight, as she pulled into the small parking lot near the park, she felt something different. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was heavy, oppressive, filled with the echoes of words she had never said. Marie parked the car and stepped out into the cool evening air. The wind off the river was brisk, tugging at her hair and sending a shiver down her spine. She walked slowly toward the edge of the promenade, where the river spread out before her like a dark, shimmering sheet. Across the water, the lights of Québec City twinkled, distant but familiar, like stars fallen from the sky. She stood there for a long moment, her arms wrapped around herself as the weight of the past settled on her shoulders. In the distance, she could hear the low rumble of a ferry making its way across the water. She imagined Gabriel standing on the deck, his hair tousled by the wind, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had always been looking ahead, always ready to move on to the next chapter. And she had been looking back, afraid to leave what she knew behind. The thought of him filled her chest with a dull ache, one she had grown used to over the years but never quite accepted. She pulled out her phone and stared at his name in her contacts. She hadn't called him in nearly 3 years. What would she even say? I miss you? It sounded so small, so insufficient, compared to everything she had felt during their time apart. The ferry's horn sounded again, a low, mournful note that seemed to echo her thoughts. She had always chosen the bridge. Maybe tonight, it was time to choose something different. Her thumb hovered over Gabriel's name for a long moment before she finally pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring stretched out, feeling like a lifetime. And then suddenly the ringing stopped, and his voice, soft, familiar, yet so distant, filled the silence. Marie? She froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't speak, the sound of his voice stirring up too many emotions at once. She had forgotten what it felt like to hear him, to be connected to him, even if just by the sound of his voice. But the warmth in his tone, the way he said her name, made it clear that he hadn't forgotten her. Gabriel, she finally managed, her voice softer than she intended. It's me. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for her to wonder if maybe this had been a mistake. But then he spoke again, and there was a smile in his voice. I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. She swallowed, her throat tight. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I've been thinking a lot about us, she said, the words coming out quietly but steadily. About the last time we talked? The last time we drove over this bridge together? Another pause, but this time it felt like there was something between them that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking about that too, he said, his voice softer now, more serious. I wondered if I made the right choice. Leaving. I wondered the same thing, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the river. Maybe we both made the wrong choice. The sound of the ferry's horn echoed again, and Marie closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She could feel the tension between them, the unspoken words that had lingered in the air for so long. But tonight, standing on the edge of the river, with the city lights flickering across the water, it felt like the distance between them was finally starting to close. I miss you, Gabriel, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I think I always have. For a long time, there was only silence on the other end of the line. But then finally he spoke, his voice quiet but full of emotion. I miss you too, Marie. The ferry's lights appeared in the distance, slowly making its way across the river, a glowing beacon in the night. Marie watched it, feeling a sense of peace settle over her that she hadn't felt in years. Maybe, Gabriel said after a long pause, it's time we cross this river together again. But this time we take the ferry. Marie smiled, tears welling in her eyes as she watched the boat glide across the water. Maybe it was time to let go of the bridge, to stop holding on to the past and embrace the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Yeah, she said softly, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Maybe it is. As the ferry continued its slow journey across the river, the night deepened, and the stars above seemed to grow brighter. The river flowed on, carrying the weight of their unspoken words and unmade choices. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, it also carried the hope of something new.